Just kidding. Alright, so hey guys, I am the white girl philosopher and we're learning today, which is why there's a globe. Can you touch the globe without seeing it? The answer to that is no, apparently. Okay, so we're learning about psychology today, and I picked 2 experiments that were very controversial, and I wanted to bring them to you and talk about them with you so we can learn something. Let's get educated, and let's also make that a tag on Twitter. Is that a tag on Twitter? Because if it isn't, it should be. And I'm not on Twitter, but I would be on Twitter if that was a tag. So, the 2 experiments that I have decided to talk about today are the Stanley Milgram shock experiment and the Zimbardo Stanford prison experiment. After World War II, people were shocked at how this could happen, and so a lot of social psychologists did experiments because they wanted to see if this could ever happen again, if people really are capable of this, or if this was a one-time thing. 1961 to 1963, Stanley Milgram conducted these shock experiments. So in these experiments, what he would do is he would have the contestants, and it would seem like this random system where there were 2 people in a room, and one of them would pick out of a hat, and it would be the teacher and the learner. But really it was rigged, and the person who got the learner was the person part of the experiment, and the person who always got the teacher was always the volunteer. So they would go into 2 separate rooms, and the teacher would witness the learner being strapped up to this machine, and then the teacher would go in the other room and they would ask the learner questions, and when the learner received the question wrong, they would have to shock them. And the shocking went from like 15 volts to 450 volts. As the last voltage was like a deadly amount of electricity to go into the human body. So what the experiment found is that 65% of the people went all the way to the end and did the like deadly last voltage. So this experiment was kind of shocking because it showed that average people can be obedient to a fault. With an authoritarian figure, you can essentially do awful things, and that's just really shocking to know about human nature. Stanley Milgram's experiments found that obedience was highest when the authoritarian figure was close at hand and he was perceived to be an authoritative person. In your daily life, you're more likely to take advice or to be obedient to a parent or a teacher figure who's authoritative over like a classmate. If your classmate says you're doing that wrong, you're going to be more skeptical and be like, oh, okay, thanks, and probably just not fix it. If a teacher comes by and if a teacher comes by and says that's wrong, you're going to be like, oh, wow, thank you, and you're probably going to fix it. If the authoritative figure was supported by a prestigious institute, they're also more likely to follow that and be obedient to that person. In middle school and high school, you're taught only to listen to, like, for example, when you are citing, you're taught to only go by prestigious websites. You want .edus, .govs, even .orgs, but you have to be more skeptical with .orgs, and .coms you have to be super skeptical, and no one likes Wikipedia. If you have a teacher who takes your citings from Wikipedia, then they're different from every teacher I've ever met. So you are taught from a young age, and it shows as you get older, you are more likely to believe a Yale University study than like a little organization that you've never heard of. If the victim was depersonalized or at a distance, even in the other room. So that also makes sense, because if you depersonalize someone, then it's not hurting a person. Alright, so the second experiment I want to talk about is the Zimbardo Stanford prison experiment. So this experiment took place in the summer of 1971. And what happened with this experiment is there was an ad in a paper wanted boys from a certain age range. And what happened is these boys would come in and they would give them a role. They would either be a guard or a prisoner. And this experiment was supposed to last 14 days. and I think it only ended up lasting 5. A hallway in the basement of Stanford where the experiment took place was converted into a makeshift prison, and you would have one side of it was a tiny hallway, and you would have one side of the building which had the room doors on it, and each of the rooms had been converted into a prison cell. And so these boys that had been recruited by an ad in the newspaper, and they were given each a role. They were either a prisoner or they were a guard, and they were supposed to take up this role. Zimbardo, he took on the role as the prison warden. So this made him hard to be partial and non-biased, to take a step back from the experiment and look at it and be, okay, it's gone too far. Because it did go too far. The guards were awful, and the kids who were the prisoners were going on hunger strikes and stuff. And so this showed how people who, given a role, can take it to that next level and be completely like inhumane and awful to other people when they aren't like that as another person. And a role is defined as a set of expectations or norms about a social position. So it's pretty much a definition of how someone ought to behave in a situation or given this role. And I mean, you see this all the time in your daily life with like gender roles and stereotypes, like stuff like that. It all becomes from rules because it's a norm at which someone ought to be in that position. The foot in the door phenomenon, which kind of goes in with this role-playing thing, if someone has agreed to a smaller task or a request, then later on they are more likely to agree to a larger request. So when people talk about marijuana as being the gateway drug, this is a perfect example of the foot in the door phenomenon. Why they refer to marijuana as a gateway drug is because if you are okay with smoking marijuana and you accept it from people, that is the smaller request. So later on it will mean that you are more susceptible to agreeing to larger requests such as cocaine. So I hope you guys learned about obedience and roles and experiments, and I just hope you feel a little smarter after watching this video than when you did before. And my personal opinion is if you know about things and if you are educated about things, then you are less likely to repeat them. So now maybe we won't be as obedient to faults and we won't let roles define us. And I hope you guys have a great day, and yeah, I'll see you later. Get educated. Okay. Just touch the glove. That was probably really creepy. Okay. And